Hey everybody, we're live today here in our Bat Cave at Revision Energy with the amazing Barry Woods, the Director of Innovation in our electric vehicle division, talking all about electric cars, how exciting it is, what the technology is like, and whatever questions might come in through Facebook, so feel free to drop in our feed. Barry, why do you love electric cars?
Fred, first of all, thank you. This is great. I appreciate the chance to always to talk to you, Fred, and to share what information I've acquired. Why do I like electric cars? First thing I like about them is they are superior technology. They're more fun to drive, they're quieter, they cost less, and at the same time that they have all those virtues, they don't emit any of the typical carbon emissions that fossil fuel vehicles do, so they're clean. So it's like a complete package of potential benefits for folks.
Yeah, well, so you have been following electric cars for a while, like you were out on the West Coast. So without going into your whole history, like over the time period you've been following electric cars, how would you characterize what you've seen advance in that period of time?
Well, so it always change of this magnitude always takes about 5 times longer than you would hope.
Yeah.
So I am nonetheless an eternal optimist that we're getting there, and I think one of the pieces of evidence of that with the vehicles is that we're now into what I would consider the second generation all battery electric vehicles. So where Tesla kind of came out of the gate with a really large battery, high function vehicle with a huge price tag, we're now starting to see that more consumer friendly pricing for these types of capabilities are emerging. So the Chevy Bolt with a B is a perfect example of a vehicle that the average consumer, if they're interested in driving electric, I would check the car out. The price point is really, really good, and the capability is there. And so the larger battery is one of the big distinguishing features, and a better battery chemistry, and that price point, are two of the elements, that I think make this generation of vehicles something the average consumer can truthfully look at.
Yeah. So what was your first electric vehicle?
I had a 2011 Nissan Leaf, one of 17,000 electric vehicles sold that year.
Yeah.
And I think it was exciting. I put a Red Sox sticker on the back of it in Oregon, which was nice. And I got, on a good day, 80 miles of range.
Yeah.
So, and it seemed like it was absolutely revolutionary.
And so now 7 years-ish later, what does your Bolt do?
So yesterday I went up to Sugarloaf from Portland.
Nice.
Came back.
Yeah.
Now, it was really close, but I did not have to charge.
Oh, so you didn't charge Sugarloaf?
I got 252 miles out of it yesterday, pretty much with very minimal on-site charging.
Yeah,
So,
well, I think it's worth talking about that because that's obviously people like go on about range anxiety and all that. So
right.
You would talk about both whether people should have range anxiety or not, and then also we can talk about how infrastructure is coming along.
So anxiety being relative. Some people worry about a lot of things. I think that in the initial phase of this technology, it was really a reasonable thing. My wife was telling me, most people are not going to buy a $30,000 car that only gets 80 miles of range, like the 2011 Leaf, and I thought she was crazy. But now, in retrospect, she was absolutely right.
Yeah.
I think that we look at cars and now in terms of functionality. So anybody who's looking at a car with a plug needs to think about what are they going to use it for. And if you're driving into New York from Portland on a regular basis, maybe you shouldn't be looking for an all battery electric. Maybe you should look for a plug-in hybrid, that gives you a little bit of gas on board that'll enable you to get that range without any additional serious effort. But bit by bit we are seeing, because these larger battery vehicles are coming out, that their enhanced functionality means that they're more attractive to a wider number. So the first thing that I noticed when I got the Bolt was, my God, I don't really have to worry about range. Because it gets 240 miles, which is not something on a day-to-day basis I'm going to be driving.
Unless you're driving to California tomorrow.
Right.
Not a problem.
That was very. It was a cause for relief, and it's only going to get better.
Yeah.
Right. So, I think that's the good news, is that it's really range anxiety is sort of a thing of the past as people start thinking about these cars.
Yeah. Well, and so I should say, Revision, we don't sell electric cars. We can tell you many places that do, and we have great relationships with all of them. What we're really here to do, apart from just, being huge advocates for the technology, and we'll talk about solar in a moment.
Right.
But it's also, we're also building the actual infrastructure. So you've done a ton of that, and really just in the last year, you're going to talk about the kinds of places that are getting and where people are going to see chargers these days.
Yeah, sure. And it's true. The tail doesn't wag the dog. Nobody's going to buy infrastructure from us unless they see that the car itself actually meets their needs.
Yeah.
So unfortunately or fortunately, I actually spend a lot of my time probably selling these cars. Which is just part of the byproduct of what we do. But I think, the good news is that from a charging infrastructure standpoint, all of the states now have received VW settlement money, which is earmarked, a certain percentage of which is going to be earmarked for developing public charging resources. So we're going to see the electrification of the major travel corridors through most states. So in Maine, it would be like I-95, 295, in New Hampshire would be 89 and 93. And so that obviously is designed to make this range anxiety issue kind of go away. Because even when you have to travel longer distances now, there will be charging resources and fast charging resources that'll get you back on the road quickly. So that's, I think, a pretty significant development that will be happening in most states in the near future, and has already started. And then we've done a lot of charging with workplace type charging is one area that we've done some work with. We just finished an 8 charger placement at LL Bean, sort of a public commercial charging venue that they see the value in attracting plug-in drivers, and they've provided a nice resource that's free. And they realize that you come there and you use a level 2 charger, which typically gives you 20 to 25 miles of range an hour. You're going to spend an hour, maybe 2, in the store. And so it provides, I'm sure, additional economic benefits to them as a retailer just by providing that amenity. And so that's certainly one of the other areas that we're seeing more enhanced development of infrastructure, and hotels, and destination charging. I mean, in Maine, we have a fairly significant tourism economy, and I think there's a lot of conscious effort going in to providing resources, whether it's golf resorts or ski resorts or breweries or the whole litany of sort of hospitality industry folks. That's all being developed and and can be used by the local population as well as the traveling public.
So in other words, you don't really have an excuse. If you're like a long haul sort of trucker kind of scenario, there's certain use cases where EVs don't make sense. But even for some of the more remote parts of Maine now, electric vehicles is a completely reasonable type of thing we drive around.
It's certainly reasonable for most locations, and it will be increasingly practical. I mean, and of course, the other thing is the dirty secret is most people charge at home anyway.
Yeah.
So if you're a Maine citizen, or you're going to find that from a behavior standpoint. 80+% of the time, you don't really care about what the public charging resource is because you're going to charge at home, which is an interesting opportunity for us to help, get folks to be thinking more broadly about the intersection of clean transportation and clean energy. So,
Well, and so one of the things I really want to start talking about, because there's a lot of interesting things we start talking about how towns and companies can use the cars, but let's stay on consumers for a moment.
Sure.
So we were chatting earlier. So obviously EVs they use electricity instead of gas, which is cleaner and even from the grid is less expensive and actually even way better with solar. Less maintenance. So right.
So in terms of the vehicle.
So let's talk about why. So apart from it's a Chevy Bolt. Motor Trend, was it car of the year
when it first came out?
Yeah. So it's a beautiful car. It's like the cariest car you could ever want. Right. Plus, it saves you a ton of money.
Right. It's something that people, when they start to look into this area, I think that they're amazed at some of the virtues of the technology. So, you've got lower operational costs. Usually, right now in Maine, it's gas is at about $3 a gallon, or give or take. So you're going to save $1.50 a gallon equivalent for an electric gallon. That's grid based. And solar, residential rooftop solar is more along the lines of about 71 cents per electric gallon, which is really remarkable. So operational costs are less. The cars, because they don't have heat as a byproduct that has to be dealt with through, cooling systems and emission control systems, there's many, many fewer moving parts. So the maintenance of them is much less. They use regenerative braking. So 90% of the time when I'm driving the Chevy Bolt, I'm driving one pedal. and I'm letting the regen do the braking. So I'm not even using the brakes. So I'm not even, casting brake filings onto the road, so, and much less the cost of brake replacement. So the maintenance costs are incredibly less, I think. The only thing that I think consistently I found with the cars that I've owned that need to be replaced are the tires. And that's just because there's
rubber's,
too much
rubber's
fun.
not made out of titanium.
It's too much fun hitting the torque on the things, and so that's just and so if you're in the tire manufacturing or tire sales business, EVs will be a godsend, a continued income source.
And so everything you just said applies the same to fleet uses. So if you are, because a lot of towns are starting to see EVs because someone is driving around the town all the time. They're maybe not putting a lot of miles in a day, but they are putting a lot of miles in the vehicle. Gosh, if we can not pay for fuel and pay a much lower cost for fuel for these fleet vehicle uses, that's super appealing.
Yeah, no, we've seen, we've even seen pizza delivery companies, with the Nissan Leaf, because it's a perfect example of, pretty short distance travel with lots of opportunities to charge during the day. So that's one. But cities, parking, violation, folks who are parked a lot, and we've seen the city of Portland do that. City of South Portland is adopting all battery electrics. So the fleet, the operational cost. There's not the fuel pricing volatility that we see with gas. And so from a fleet manager standpoint, it's almost breathtaking.
Well, and maintenance.
And maintenance, right. So it's and as the cost of the vehicles come down, there's not any added upfront cost to these cars either. So you're really coming out of the gate with some pretty interesting, financial advantages.
You're not scheduling all those stupid oil changes.
No stupid oil changes. Yep.
And so that's sort of one model. The other model is, like you said, workplace charging. So employers, as employees, you sort of start, not quite expect it, but it's a nice way to make employees happy and something you can offer. And it's a way to say, hey, we're green, right?
Right. Yeah. Revision offers charging. This is a great, it's a place that, of course, I drive a lot more than I would have thought during the day. So I actually use the charging for a lot of day-to-day activity. But from an employer standpoint, if you have an employee that's commuting any distance, you're in a position to offer for a fairly modest investment, a really nice amenity. And most employees, in fact, I think would be willing to pay for the cost of the electricity. And then you get into more urban settings where people don't have residential, single-family homes with garages, right? So workplace becomes an opportunity for people to actually charge the car and own the car. So instead of relying on your plugging in at home, you flip it and you rely on the employer to provide you with that opportunity. So there's a number of reasons I think that workplace charging is, I think, a pretty significant opportunity for employers to do the right thing, give an employee benefit and help with retention, and clean up a pretty emission dirty sector.
Yeah, it's a pretty in the grand, obviously we'd like everybody to do solar,
right.
But in terms of here's something you can say in a real credible way has made your company move to more carbon neutrality. It's a pretty easy checkbox.
Absolutely. And right now, actually the transportation sector is the single largest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah. So, they've supplanted the energy sector now that we've been phasing out coal and other fossil fuels. So, so it's a pretty significant dirty sector to address.
Cool. And we actually have a ebook we did on this topic. We're going to link to it
nice.
On this thing, so if you're interested, check it out.
Yeah, good.
Let's talk about solar. Okay, so the only thing better than because people do ask, and
sure.
I think we can talk about what people should understand, because some people think, solar powered electric car. We're not literally strapping solar panels onto your Chevy Bolt and having you drive around. It's connected to your house still. Do you just want to talk?
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about that marriage between clean energy and clean transportation is we hadn't had the choice of doing this before.
Right.
Now all of a sudden, we have the opportunity to control the costs, control the kind of energy source that we're using. And solar offers the average consumer huge operational savings. What we've calculated is that if you drive an average of 10,000 miles a year, you're going to need about 8 solar panels. Of course, that's a pretty small array for the average person. Most people put in, for residential rooftop, will put in enough to compensate for some of the household load. But the idea of starting to size and think about solar not just as a way to defray, the electricity load of the house, but your vehicle, creates very stable cost over a long term. So the eight panels, I think we calculated that out. It's about 71 cents for an electric gallon using that model, and it's a pretty, again, it's pretty economical, and it's a long-term investment. So you have, by putting in solar, you're creating a generation source for your car that's warranted typically 20, 25 years, probably has significant life beyond that in terms of meeting that nameplate generation capacity. And once you paid it off, you're basically driving a clean energy source for free. For however many years you can squeak out of that solar array.
Yeah,
so
and even if we wanted to drill for oil in Maine, you're not going to find any.
You're not going to find any, and what's the point in putting a gas station at your house, typically?
Yeah,
It's not economically effective.
I think that's kind of the funny thing, right? Because people would never consider that, because
Right.
gas stations are disgusting.
Right.
Like solar is clean. And
Well, you might
that's what
consider it
people-
if you got $1 per gallon of gas. You
Like
might
maybe-
put
you might-
10,000
yeah,
gallons.
maybe,
but
yeah.
why do that when you can get clean energy from your rooftop?
Yeah,
So,
no, it's beautiful, but
Yeah.
to be clear, right, so it's net meter scenario, right? And
Yes.
so you work during the day. What's technically happening is that your power is you're making the power at night, you're backfeeding your power in your neighbor's house during the day,
Yes.
and you're using your credits to charge the car.
That's true. Although we are seeing some of the technology offerings, like Solar Edge has got a inverter that has a charging connector on it. So literally, in the next 6 months, they've been piloting it. But literally, there will be a time where you plug your car in during the day, and it'll be coming direct from the array.
That's cool.
Which is really, typically that's what people think, but and in fact,
That'll be more true.
that'll be more. Yeah, I mean, it'll be true.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the meantime, you're storing energy on the grid and using it as you need it for charging at night.
So where do you think we're going with EVs? Like they say the next 5 years, what are some of the short to medium term trends that we'll see in this space?
Well, New England has been a little behind relative to what we've seen in the West Coast, which is probably not that unusual for technology. But I think it's catching up because we've got now opportunities with some of the investment from VW. The manufacturers of all of the major vehicle manufacturers are all offering some model, consumer-based light-duty passenger with a plug. We're starting to see, it went from 3 cars in 2011, we had the Roadster, the Chevy Volt, and the Leaf, and now we've got over 40 from a whole variety of manufacturers. Yeah. And I'm excited about the beginning of the SUV market converting. We've got 3 now that are in the process that are available. We've got the Mitsubishi Outlander that's basically a full-size SUV that's a plug-in hybrid. So it has gas, but it has a fairly large battery that I think gets 20 to 30 miles of range. You've got the Niro, the Kia Niro plug-in hybrid electric, same idea. Smaller SUV model, but it's all-wheel drive. And then Hyundai's coming out with one that's an all-battery SUV called the Kona. Same idea, a little bigger battery than the Bolt. So as the consumer choices and the prices of these vehicles are within the normal range of expectation, I think it's just a question of marketing them.
Yeah.
Which has been a separate, much lengthier conversation we could have. But,
yeah. Well, I mean,
yeah,
you have to have the product, and then the consumers catch up with it.
Right.
I mean, it's funny. That we think of electric vehicles is so futuristic. Like we were just a week ago at the Owl's Head Transportation Museum, and they had a 1902 electric vehicle that was 100 miles of range. Granted, it only went 20 miles an hour, but we just kind of 2 roads diverged into wood, and it's taken us 100 years to catch.
Yep, I do think our version is probably a little more practical,
yeah.
a little better. But yeah, it's sad to think that we had an opportunity to actually avoid the problem that we're currently embroiled with. But I think that it's a great idea, and I think its time has come. I think it's pretty clear that we're down a path towards electrification that we're not going to, suddenly, stop, despite some of the political forces and other things that are, trying to impact, progress. And it's a global phenomenon. I mean, that's the other thing. the U.S. is not necessarily the leader in this area currently. I mean, there's a lot of countries that are, in the EU and in Asia that are really doing a lot to promote this technology.
Like air quality would be one of those things. Like, so even if you don't believe in any of the other environmental reasons, if you want to live in a dense urban city without dying or wearing a gas mask, like electric vehicles make that a reality.
Well, and China's going to do away with a combustion engine. I can't remember the date, but it's not that far in the future. It's like 2030, and obviously they have a public health imperative to address that. But yeah, I mean, it's the nice thing about the EV is that it's really a bipartisan issue at its core, because it's both public health benefits, but also it's energy security and energy independence, which I don't think anybody can argue as being a bad thing. And it's all domestically generated, diverse generation sources. And it has that renewable energy element that, whether it's individual solar or grid-based, it's a huge potential benefit to our electric grid to have these cars attached to it. So, so it's it should be bipartisan. We shouldn't be arguing about whether these are good or bad. We should let superior technology.
That seems kind of the American way. Technology.
I am optimistic, and as I said, it's taken fivefold longer than I would have thought that it should. But I think it is a process, and
I mean, it is interesting because I remember seeing something about like Google specifically trying to figure out how to get into the clean energy space, and what they find is that unlike tech, like tech is you sort of have very predictable, like all these unicorns start appearing, and you can solve problems. And it's the grid and infrastructure and vehicles they're harder. They're harder problems than just necessarily, not that a search engine that indexes all the world's content is not like an amazing feat of engineering, but like the electric grid is actually even more complicated than that. And so it's just taken some time. It has taken time because it's a harder thing.
I mean, there's a huge think about it's just the utility system. The investor-owned utilities, the publics like co-ops, and I mean, it's a fragmented system with all kinds of overlays of community and state-based regulatory oversight, and it's just very complicated to move. But again, I think the technology, the interjection of intelligence into the grid, and the idea that you can grow the load now. I mean, that's the other thing about the cars from a utility standpoint that's very different, right? They've been having to figure out how do we get rewarded for having our customers not use us. Now all of a sudden they have a car that's going to use on average 6 to 8 kilowatts per hour, 6 to 8 kilowatt hours per day, which is a huge amount of additional load, and every consumer is going to have one. I mean, it is massive in terms of what the potential usage looks like. And all of a sudden, maybe they are in the electricity business. It is complicated, but the incentives are there, the benefits are there to help us figure out how to overcome these obstacles.
Cool. I'm just going to see. We do have one comment. Go EVs. As an EV owner for 4 years, I'll never go back. Best car I've ever had, and I save $100 a month in gas, even after the cost of electricity is taken into consideration. So
what more can you say? That's a great testimony, and that's the kind of thing that I think it's important for people to hear. It's important to talk to drivers who've been driving and can actually testify about what the benefits are.
Don't
listen to us.
People become enthusiasts for a reason, because it's like actually something to get enthusiastic about.
Right. And the other thing, there's lots of opportunities for consumers to drive these cars. There is a great. Just to give it a quick plug, I mean, there's a great opportunity coming up in September. All states are part of National Drive Electric Week, and it's a week-long event that runs from one weekend to the other. I think it's September 9th to the 16th. Maine this year is going to have 3 events. LL Bean is going to host one. The town of Norway and Center for Ecology-Based Economy typically host one, and then there's the South Portland Community Center event that we're involved with. And that's a great opportunity for people to come and test drive the vehicles, but also to talk to folks, like Heather, who's talking about what she saves, because lots of EV drivers like to come to these events and share what their experience has been.
Because it's awesome. Cool.
So.
Well, thanks, Barry.
My
if you're
pleasure.
interested, come back in September. We have a link to our EV guide, and you can always drop us a line. But talking about how fun the future is going to be.
It's going to be bright. Thank you.
Cheers.